Gary, and I'm pleased again today to host another, what I call a Sparkenation Conversation. And for those of you that don't know, a Sparkenation is a spark that ignites passion, that leads to action, that changes what's normal. And I'm thrilled today that our special guest is Jason Fox. And I don't do long introductions, so don't panic anyone, but many years ago, I was the national president of the Professional Speakers Association of Australia, and we awarded Jason the Kerry Nan Scholarship, which is something we do to one person every year for who we think might be a rising star. Well, Jason's star is still rising, but he's no longer a rising star. And it's a great privilege to see how you've gone from those early days, Jason. I don't even think you were a doctor then in those days, but
no, as an apprentice.
It's great to see the impact that you're making on the world, and we welcome you today. We also welcome everyone else. I'm going to kick off with just a quick little story about where I'm at personally in relation to the roles that I think I'm going to play in 2021, and hopefully that'll be a nice segue into Jason and then everyone else, because really we're here. This is not a webinar, this is a conversation, and we'll look forward to everyone involving yourself at some point or another. In the last couple of weeks, I've completed Jason's great course about finding a one word to guide your choices and actions for the year. And this is I think it's my third year, Jason, using your technique. I used to do the Chris Broken technique of 3 words, but then I saw a video from Jason and I began with this one word. It's a great little course. I recommend it if you haven't done it. I think, Jason, there are something like 70 videos on the course. I've looked at maybe 15, but I got my word quite early on, and my word for 2021 is energized. And then I started to think, what roles would I play in 2021? One of them was obviously to be an energizer. But then as I was thinking about this afternoon, I thought, what I'd like to be, what a role I'd like to play in 2021 is to be a wizard.
Yeah.
And I thought, what better person than Jason to ask, well, what's a wizard?
You do have the beard for it, Ian.
Thank you very much.
He certainly does. He certainly
does. So what's a wizard, and is there a role for wizards in 2021? What's the female word for wizards? Is it different? I thought we might start there.
That's a beautiful place to start. And I just want to say a quick hello to Cecilia, who's joined us. It's lovely. And before we get carried away, even though it might feel a bit odd, I've been in this habit of, we'll just do and I should have just checked this with you, but it's just a quick acknowledgement of country. Pay our respects to any elders present here today, any folks from First Nations First Nations cultures. Extend this respect and solidarity to all First Nations peoples and any elders past, present and emerging. I'm coming to you from Naarm. This always is, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And there's a situation where in COVID and all the unfurlings that we have of 2020, where I think a lot of us are living lives of much more locality that's juxtaposed with this much more global, hyper-connected internet life, which is, I found really, really fun to balance. And so, in answer to your question, Ian, wizard, and even with your word there, I've become such a word snob. It's so hard for me. Like I hear people's words and, these things that flare up in me. Like when you say energized, like I immediately think, oh, you poor thing. Like what happens when you're not feeling energized? What does that look like? And I'm being slightly playful here, but there's the kind of the meanings that we make of the words. I find so enlivening. And so I'm just going to spitball here a little bit. You talked about wizard. Wizard, I've kind of, it does tend to have male connotations, but I've come to see it much more as most of these roles we can decouple from gender. Even, there's witches and wizards and warlocks and shamans and magicians and sorcerers and illusionists and conjurers and all sorts of magic users that all have their different nuances, enchantresses, and all of that stuff. But for me, wizard was a word that I chose for a year that, to me, I felt the need to return to deep work, to more scholarly work. I wanted to embrace my hermit-like characteristics. I wanted to kind of delve into darker domains. I felt that the previous year I was so busy that I was only doing surface level work. And for me, wizard is just so much easier than saying thought leader or expert consultant or any other things that I kind of I don't necessarily associate with it these days. So wizard as a word and as an archetype evokes a certain cluster of meanings around it. So if I was to say my word for the year is barbarian, that's going to give a very different feeling tone to wizard, and the connotations that one imagines, the dispositions and sensibilities that one's going to adopt would be different under the word barbarian as opposed to wizard, for example. Anyway, that's a bit of a scattergun thing. I kind of like sprinkled out some little provocations, plenty of things we can play with here.
One of the things that I discovered in looking up synonyms for wizard, as I was searching for the female word, I came across exorcist, which puts another whole connotation on things.
I love it. There's this thing when we choose our words for the year. It's like that we can have the root words, the kind of themes, the things that we recognize, that we all lean into. And part of the whole process of choosing one word is actually to go beyond the default surface themes, to actually start to question the hidden commitments and conflicting values, the recurring patterns that keep holding us back from who we might become. But one of the things is when we find our root words, which are often quite boring words, we then want to kind of go from just a word that's like, oh yeah, to a word that's like, fuck yeah. Like an exorcist has that fuck yeah component to it. It's like, yeah. If someone chose the word exorcist for the year, gosh, that's a pretty powerful word.
I wasn't quite brave enough to choose it as my word.
No, I'm not
either. but it did kind of get into some connotations. I'm interested in what other folks might think, because it sort of led me down this rabbit hole, Jason, and I know that this is work that you're keen on and interested in as well, and other folk in the room might be too. It's kind of a bit shadowy, it's a bit kind of dark, and I imagined, particularly when we're in my opinion, hopefully about to see the end of Trump, maybe not so much Trumpism, but the end of Trump. It's just interesting how we do need to cast out a few demons about the place, and maybe we haven't quite embraced what Carl Jung called the darker side or the shadow. And so I was reflecting on that while I was waiting for you guys to join, and I just happened to see on my bookshelf a little book called Owning Your Own Shadow, which is written by a Jungian psychologist. And so I was keen to know as well, Jason, your ideas about, is there gold in the dark? Is there good in the darkness? Is there good, from people like Donald Trump? Is there some good that we can actually learn?
All right, so I'm an academic rogue overthinker, so you're never going to get a simple nor straight answer from me. So I love the provocation. But I'm hesitant around words like good, because it can put a moralistic judgment on things. The ultimate thing that we come back to here is that we are a species of experience, kind of continuously in development, as part of a hyper complex thing beyond any of our ability to comprehend. And things emerge. Trump is his own kind of collection of development in some ways, but also Trump emerged in a system that has emerged over plenty of time. So when I look at these things, I'm like, I'm curious. The shadow stuff I love, and the reason I love this is because most people don't spend a lot of time here. I find that when people are choosing aspirations or themes for their new year, they'll often look at what they've done previously, and it seems to be mostly an incremental thing. Like, it's just people want more good stuff. They want more, they just want to work harder, strive, be more productive, more focused, be more present, whatever it is. But it's when we go into the dark, the shadow stuff, that the real insight emerges. But at the same time, and I haven't read the book, so and I know what publishers are like, they go for catchy titles. I'm hesitant around notions of ownership. Funny things happen when we start talking about ownership. We start to have a sense of entitlement. We start to defend things. We start to think this is mine. But my imagination of this Jungian psychologist or philosopher is that it's more around taking responsibility for your own shadow stuff rather than
he kind of meant
owning it.
embrace.
Yeah. Oh yeah, embrace the dark for sure. Yeah.
Embrace and acceptance of this is a part of who you are.
Yes, beautiful.
We're much
David.
more complex. We're not just goodies.
Yes.
I spent a whole career on the dark side.
Yeah.
And that's David talking, who just happens to be our guest next month. But David was in the covert spy kind of world, weren't you, David? A long time ago. No doubt met a few shadowy characters.
I had so just quickly, I had the joy in my formative years of my professional speaking life to share several roundtables with David, and had the benefit of his timely sagacity and wisdom early on in the piece. So it's really nice to see you, David, after many years.
Likewise, Jason. It's been many years since we've seen each other. It's cool. Yeah.
So what about other folks in the room? Let's get into the conversation here. We've got some all sorts of possibilities here.
If I layer in a little bit more context, I think that folks can choose a word, a theme, an aspiration, a disposition, a set of sensibilities, a set of principles, and all of those things at any time in the year. It just so happens that we're close to a solstice, we're close to the switch in the Gregorian calendar. We're also in this shared moment where a lot of people have a little bit of time off work, and collectively as a society, as in a collection of cultures, we're generally in a mood of contemplating what might lie ahead. And I like the term, I've come to really appreciate the notion of role-playing. There's a geeky element that used to play Dungeons and Dragons that likes the term, but it goes beyond just pop culture. I like sensing into the roles that we play in the complex lives that we lead, and to take this vantage point that we have, this meta perspective, to contemplate, okay, given what we can reflect upon in the last year, given the patterns that we tend to live into, what roles are going to be important for us in the year ahead, and how might we play them better? So that might layer in some things in amongst it, but like I'm pretty keen to like just play with what emerges. So if anything's coming alive to anyone.
Yeah, I like the idea of choice, that we actually have a lot of choice. And so I saw somebody else wanted to speak just then, so I'll back down.
Jamie, I think you were coming in.
Yeah, and I suppose clarity is probably at the moment comes directly to mind as my one word as of the 6th of January, and that's clarity on a lot of things in my life. That's clarity on what's happening in our world. That's clarity on the future in employment, and I'm currently in 14 days isolation because I'm one of the naughty 60,000 people that holidayed in New South Wales and live in Victoria. So, although I've got my home stop on, so I'm actually on annual leave, stuck in the four walls, or in this point, I'm outside of in my backyard. So yeah, clarity on why I'm here would be even nicer. But I think clarity is a word for me. Which also then will take me into the dark side as well, Jason. To be honest.
100%. Yeah, I was going to say, just I hope you're willing to embrace a lot of ambiguity, because a word like clarity would just beckon, like, the more you know you don't know. the more you yearn for clarity, the more you're going to be met with obfuscation and, uncertainty and ambiguity and all of those things. And there's something almost counterintuitive with words like this, which might actually have you embracing the dark, embracing the unknown, the uncertainty. There's this wonderful book by Alan Watts, The Wisdom of Insecurity, which Alan, in his own charismatic way, talks of this collective yearning that we all have to arrive, to have things clear, to have a sense of like it all makes sense finally, like I understand now. But this yearning for this arrival, like I'll just layer in another thing. My friend Bruce McTarg has this beautiful notion of lily pads of certainty. So a lot of us in this like uncertain world with all the volatility and the complexity crave a sense of certainty. Like, what the hell is going on? We just want to have a sense of clarity and certainty. And that's possible, but they're only going to be lily pads of certainty. As in, they'll serve us if we're very light with them and we don't spend too long there. But as soon as we get heavy, as soon as we become attached, the lily pad will sink below the surface again. So yeah, Jamie, that's going to be a fun year.
I mean, Cecilia in the chat, Jamie, has asked a great question about loving to hear what favourite words of the year from participants in the past, which might help craft
That's a great idea.
And so what's popped up so far is curiosity, essence, clearing, passion. Others can chime in.
Yeah, Tim, the Zen Archer.
So,
Tim, do you want to share? Oh, sorry, can I just...
You finish.
Just quick. This is great. You go.
But my idea is probably the opposite of Jamie. I've been working in higher education for 25 years, and the last year has been an absolute roller coaster that's included separation from an employer due to lack of funds, and the framework is broken, if you will. So this year is really a year of me being a changeling. So about being reborn and taking all of the different skills and experiences I had. So I've taught at university, I've worked as a business analyst, I participated in university-wide negotiations of EDAs, a whole raft of different things over the years. And whip that into a new context. And I'm not sure what form that will be. It's evolving and emerging. And that's okay.
Yeah. And, I just can't help but play the trickster role here and do the exact same thing I did to Jamie, in that the fun thing about changeling and, there's a cool kind of metamorphosis, the chameleon-like adapting to the context and all of that, is that in amongst the year of doing that and changeling, there's going to be this question, okay, yes, but what do I really want, independent of some of the contexts I find myself in? Not that independence is actually true, but in the process of living through this year, you're going to get these seeds of glimmers of insight into, all right, what might be next in this unfurling story of your own life. And when I talk about an unfurling story, I don't want us to get too tightly attached to any narrative that we have of our lives. Sometimes people go through their lives and groom themselves a personal story, like, ever since I was 12 years old, I knew that I would be a baseball player and I would win Olympic. I don't know what baseball players do, but we just got to be kind of like a little bit fluid and dance with reality as it emerges. And I wonder if I can just quickly throw to Tim, if you're happy to share, because I think that the context for your word Zen Archer is really apt. And I wonder if you might want to share us a little bit of a glimpse as to how that served you last year.
Sure. So this is probably my fourth year of choosing a word. The year before, 2019, I picked a fluffy word, and it didn't really connect with me, and it sort of flew off into the ether. But last year, the word that I picked through the choose your one word course was Zen Archer. So for me, it was around really trying to narrow in my focus. I was thinking like sniper focus, but that felt a bit too military-esque and not where I wanted to go. So Zen Archer sort of landed for me on sort of two fronts. So I wrote a bit of a blurb on what that meant. I sent it to Jason earlier that year. So the summary I gave it myself was a skilled bowman who prefers the fringe of the battlefield, however, is adept at being in the perfect position to patiently wait for the right moment to loose the arrow through the air to the target. One who has a deep understanding that everything is aiming. The position of the feet, how the bow is held, the breath during the loose of the arrow, the direction and strength of the breeze is intertwined with determining the end results. That was sort of where I positioned my word words for the year. So it's really around focusing on that attention and focus, clarity of mind, and intentionality and purpose with what I was doing through the year. And as it was just shared by James, thank you for sharing your experience for the year. Last year was a write-off. And I sort of sat back at the end of the year going, I felt like I failed. And I shared a bit of a summary of my year going, well, I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve through the course of the year. But then reflecting back through the Zen Archer view, it sort of go, well, actually, those principles and practices that I set up at the beginning of the year really helped sort of provide some stability and drew me back into at least get grounded again to continue through and I guess ride the wave effectively. So it was a really good way just to keep myself centered through that time.
It's a wonderful way, might I say, to use a metaphor to clarify a role as well. I think that's probably evident in some of the other words there, Jason, like anti-fragile, declutter, catharsis. There's a whole lot of metaphors and images there, isn't there?
Yes, and I mean, also just for further context, in Tim's completing a PhD at the moment, or final, or I don't know.
It was supposed to be last year, but I will finish it this year, Jason. I promise.
So, I mean, this is a classic thing, though. But this is one of those things that requires a level of focus. So you can imagine how Zen Archer. It's not just focus. It's not just discipline. And I like, you even skirted with sniper, but like it was too military. It's too clinical and cold and too distant and removed. Whereas Zen Archer has this kind of breadth and grace and placement and a dynamism. Like it's just, there's so much poetic, there's so much enchantment built into it. And so yeah, Ian, there's wonderful words. One of the things I encourage folks, once we've got the root words and we start blossoming off with a visual thesaurus, or we start really sensing and reading and attuning and developing an acuity for noticing apt words, is there's kind of four kinds of words that we can play with. There's abstract words, there's active words, there's aspect words, and there's archetype words. So abstract, active, aspect, and archetype. For me personally, I find the abstract words the hardest because partly it's like, say for example, anti-fragile. That's a fairly esoteric piece of knowledge that is becoming a little bit more common amongst folks, and I love it. I love anti-fragile. But say, for example, if that was transmuted into Hydra as a representation, I mean, Hydra has some weird cultish vibes to it, so that might not be the most apt. But like when you think of Hydra, you have a kind of a mythological creature there. You cut off a head of the Hydra to come back. Like it kind of symbolizes the concept of anti-fragility. But in a way that takes like a concept that's hard to visualize and kind of brings it to like an idealized form. And part of the benefit of choosing an archetype word or an aspect word, like you might have the aspect of the owl or the tiger or something, but an archetype word is that we're talking about patterns of meaning that have endured through cultures and through time. So depending on how strong or how well known your archetype is, you can share it with other people and people will know, I have a sense, a Zen Archer is very different from like Zen hermit, right? Or you know, Zen archer is very different from Zen berserker. You know, it's just like you got different. You got different sense. Like if we went with berserker, not that I recommend that at all, you can imagine that there's a lot more action going on. It's kind of less consideration. It's right up in amongst it all. So yeah, so a spectrum of words. When we have an abstract word, I once chose the year of prime. I was in my 31st year. 31's a prime number. I like prime numbers. I thought I was in prime of my life. It was prime time. And that word did not serve me very well because no one around me could remember it. No one could really translate. What do you mean prime? What does it translate to? What are your principles? What projects? What patterns of behavior? So yeah, when we have an abstract word, I wonder sometimes if there's like, can we kind of turn that into a costume or a mask or a persona, or can we enchant that a little bit more? Of course, you don't have to.
Depend upon whether the word's for you or for others.
So part of the word thing is that it serves as a gift in our social ecology. So there was one year in my life where I realized that I need to get much smarter with wealth management because I'm being a child with like, I would earn stuff and spend it. And so wealth became a thing. Not that I have a lot, but, you know, it just became something I needed to be conscious of. And so investment became like, I need to invest in health. I need to invest in saving up for a home loan, you know, invest in those things. But invest isn't quite the word that's memorable enough. And so in that year, I chose the year of the gentleman, or the gentleman pirate. And gentleman was about principles like quality in all things, being a paragon of aplomb, investing in each moment, and being present, and all those things. That word and how it was formed, I could gift to the people close to me. And likewise, I could receive their words as a gift, so that it is easier to hold each other, not to account, but just to be there as a source of encouragement for each other. Now, of course, ultimately, all of this, everything we're talking about here is completely optional. There's no one way, there's no right way. You know, I often say the way reveals the way, but by the way, there is no way. Like, we're all kind of situationally doing the best we can with the resources we've got. And so sometimes I will have a word that makes sense for me, but I know that other people won't get it. Like one year, my word was fae, F-A-E or F-E-Y, which is kind of like, and Cecilia might be familiar with this, it's kind of like the fairy folk. They're kind of the enchanted, the fae. But every time I shared that with folks, no one knew what the hell I was talking about. So I changed that to the year of the jester, which still had the sprightly kind of not 100% in this world vibe. It allowed me to speak truth to those in positions of power, to be light and graceful, and you know, a lot of truth is said in jest. But behind that, I was living my year of the fae. So, in long story short, David, I would say that like you can have a word completely for yourself. One of my friends chose the word palimpsest for themselves, which, you know, I only remember because of how bad a word it was for me to remember. But, you know, that was all about palimpsest. Like when you draw on a page, it leaves an impression and there's layers and depth. And I thought, oh, well, that's lovely. I've got to stop being such a word snob. But anyway, I'm happy that it worked for him. But I would still think, you know, there's an opportunity here to gift it to the people that are close around you. I'm wondering, does anyone here do this like collectively? Does anyone here have a few friends that kind of follow this practice, and you have some sort of ritual around it? I can see you nodding, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to catch on here because I kind of discovered you very haphazardly, so I thought I'd attend this.
Oh, good.
But I was thinking about different projects I've done with people from different disciplines, and how we want to create something, or we want to innovate something together, and what it's going to be, and how we try to come up with something. And I was thinking about what you were talking about, and how it's often aspirational, and how we're all some kind of trainer or teacher or sage or consultant to other people, and what these words mean, and I was thinking about that, and I was also thinking about how very succinctly you've identified yourself. I mean, there's a lot of people in the leadership space, but you seem very, it seems very much about Middle Earth, and I don't know, I don't know the word, but you've got, I mean, it's very, I don't know, clear.
There's a vibe, there's an aesthetic and a vibe, and yeah. Thank you. Not necessarily a strategy. Well, I'm sorry, yes, yeah.
Ed was just asking, what about dragon? Is that too cheesy? Thoughts? Question mark.
Cool. Oh, all right. I'll sequence that into this like vibe piece. I mean, and it links perfectly to the dragon thing, right? So we've all got a sense into the vibe. Vibe is one of those words that is kind of at once so ineffectual. It's so like, what the hell are we talking about? But at the second time, it's sometimes the most apt because of the highly, high context worlds that we find ourselves in, which is just awash with nuance and contingency. So when we scout out something like dragon, for example, I would imagine that might. It just needs it just needs to be sensed into how that might land. Like dragon on one side could be like beautiful, like Ursula Le Guin's sense of the dragons, which are like incredibly noble creatures, like of wisdom. They have glamour, they're enchanting. There's something kind of powerful about that aspect, and mythological too. And dragons could also conjure images of like Yakuza gang members with dragon tattoos and have this kind of cyberpunky undercurrent. And so, like, I think dragon could almost, like how Tim's done with his word Zen Archer, dragon could almost be paired with another word. Like Kim, my partner, is currently playing with I still haven't come up with my word for the year, by the way. I'm still in the process. She was playing with the notion of tender muse, like M-U-S-E, as a way of, if we play with the word tender, Kim's quite a perfectionist and can be quite harsh on herself. So she's wanting to be a little bit more, I guess, warmer in her own relationship to herself. The word tender can also translate to how a gardener tends to a garden and how you actually tend to a grove. And so sometimes a word like dragon in and of itself could be qualified, could be paired with something. But if it really works for you, and it comes back to this, like ultimately, if you do all these considerations of how it's going to land and the vibe and all that's still, you've got a word and you really love it and you think, let me just pause, take a step back here. Why do we choose one word? We choose one word because this is the result of an immense period of reflection, introspection, and projection. We identify conflicting values, hidden patterns, fulfillment factors, all sorts of things that we've learned about ourselves through a year. And then we try to think, okay, there's so much complexity here, but if we were to choose just one word to serve as a fuzzy contextual beacon, one word that we can cast 12 months into the future to serve as a bit of a floating, moving beacon, so that should we ever find ourselves in a situation where we're perplexed, we don't know what to do, we don't know the decision to make, we have a word that may help call us back into alignment with what our deeper intentions are for ourselves. That's what the purpose of the word is.
And so perhaps too, Jason, when I was reflecting on roles, of course, I wrote down, husband, father, grandfather, friend, mentor, author, conversationalist, all those things that have everyone's got a meaning for them. Whereas what I found with Energizer is that I'm able to have a conversation with people because people say, well, what do you mean? And so we're able to have a conversation about it. And so I find that choosing a word that's related to a role gives us this opportunity for conversation.
That's great.
which allows us to explore, why we're serving and how we're serving.
That's
and
great.
Other things.
You've given me a new lens to see your word, energizer, like this notion of how we show up. But maybe if we could just briefly, because what happens then, Ian, when there are times that maybe this is actually the introvert in me that fears feeling drained, that fears being in situations where I show up and I can't be the energizer. Like, how do you imagine that works for you? What does this, how does, because there's plenty of room, of course, but I'm just curious, what does that mean in your world, Ian, as energizer, if that was a word that you're flexing into, which I love, by the way, the role. What happens when you're not feeling energized?
Well, I think that's when, if you've explained it to other people, then they're gonna play that role, because it would be ridiculous to think we can be energized all of the time, and it wouldn't be healthy. But I find that one of the things of leadership, what we're doing is we're either holding a great energy, or we're trying to shift a not so great energy, or we might be enhancing an energy that's already there. I mean, that's one sort of.
I love it.
That's one sort of aspect of it. So it's really about, what's the energy, and how do I
I love it.
How do I contribute to it?
So good, so good.
For that, could you look at your principles, or sorry, your practices, your rhythms or rituals to identify your own ways of recharging if you get into that, I guess, the valley or that dark space? You go, well, I'm going to go back to my ritual or practice and go, I'm going to go do A, B, C, and I know that doing these three things, spending time with my grandkids or whatever it is, not my grandkids, but maybe your grandkids, Ian, that energizes me, and by doing that, I can go back out and continue to energize other people. So you could use those principles and practices to feed into that space.
Yeah, look, and even a word, when I'm not feeling energized, I've got a word that kind of snaps me back into the right space, and my word is Yoda, because Yoda's a kind of a role model, archetypal role model. And so when I'm not feeling at the top of my game, I just, under my breath, silently to myself, I say Yoda, and it tends to bring me back to the moment. So that's a ritual, isn't it?
Yeah, and that sense too, as Tim was highlighting there, is that if you're foreseeing that, okay, I'm going to flex into Energizer, particularly this year. And then if you, like, part of the process of choosing the word is to start to future pace into the year and to almost do a pre-mortem. Where could this go wrong? And then to buffer against some of those pre-mortems by like, yeah, actually, you know what, if I'm going to be the energizer and show up for others, I'm going to have to make sure I look after my own energy. And that includes sleeping well, eating well, doing some restorative, I mean, things that you probably already have in play, I imagine, Ian. But I also like your reference to the word Yoda. Like, there's this cool, like, there are words that we choose for a year as a kind of a chapter theme, but then there are things that, as every year goes on, we assimilate aspects into our character. We become ever more complex yet integrated. I guess our self-illusion becomes ever more complex and integrated if we're doing our own development well.
True. And I think sharing it, as I began to do, like Simone is on the call, and she's a part of a group where we have a conversation every Mondays, and Jamie's a part of that group as well. But Jamie missed. We gave him a lead pass because he was on holidays. But Simone and I were talking about, what are the things that kind of stop us fulfilling our roles, to the best of our abilities. And that was an interesting conversation in itself, wasn't it, Simone, about roles and what the limitations we placed on ourselves in a way was what Simone and I talked about.
Absolutely. And it was also about having a greater understanding of our shadow self in those spaces as well. And also being able to use that shadow self, embrace it, and being able to use it for the good as well in those ways too.
I love it. Oh, I love this talk about shadows. There's a lesson. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, Cecilia. Hey.
I have a new thought, which I've just got from Ian and this conversation, that whatever word we choose, it has to also have a weak side and a dark side, because that's reality.
Indeed.
And I was thinking, if I chose energizer, I've got to choose like using reality. Am I solar energy? Am I tree energy? And get the metaphor all the way back to the physical world. Am I energizing by burning myself out for others? Not good. Renewable energy. And I'm thinking about the words I've been choosing that have really worked, and they have not been glamorous, and they look like all downside. Like this last year, I chose butler.
Beautiful.
I was my own butler, and I would I'd do the humble work to set up my house so that when I wanted something, ta-da, there you are, madam, here is what you are searching for, the photo, the email. Now, normally I don't let myself do tedious work because I'm a glamorous lady, international woman of mystery. I can't do this low-level stuff. Someone's got to do it. And my word did it for me. And I gave myself permission to do this low-paid work. Usually I've got volunteers. And it's having a word that's got a downside is really important. Zen Archer is so glamorous, but Zen Archer dies. Samurais live to 25. And you're doing it not for your boss, not for success. You're doing it for being excellent in the moment and having glory in the moment. It's not the result.
I think one of the magical things here that we're alluding to and suggesting is that in that downside, in the naughty bit, if you will, that's where the magic is. We can find a lot about our true selves in that place.
Very much. And this is all I think what we ought to be doing is trying to cast a longer shadow, and that means striving not to be well-rounded, not to simply work on our supposed weaknesses, but embrace things that aren't too comfortable, but also not too cool. There's got to be an edge. If we're talking about our own character development, characters are, distinct. There's something. I mean, I love, Cecilia, what you've mentioned there. Like, there's this, like in my own Year of the Wizard, which has come subsumed in my own character. There's a lofty aloofness that I've needed to learn to embrace, that preserves me the time and headspace to do the deep work that I like to do, because without it I get so ensnared and I fall in love with everyone who I speak to, and then before you know it, all my time has disappeared. So it's a good thing for each of us to be thinking about, as we think about these words. How might we, just come back to the shadow, how might we willingly embrace, the weakness of strength?
Wonderful thing about roles, like today, probably a good example. I was thinking about energizer, because one of the downsides is being lazy. And those of you that know me, you wouldn't equate me with being lazy, but there's something good about being lazy. So, I hung about in my dressing gown for quite a few hours this morning, and it was a good thing.
Yeah.
Didn't really focus on a lot, just basically hanging about.
Let it all hang about. That's great. In the breeze.
In there is goodness.
I'm getting such vibes from you, Ian. Like, this is my own world, but the way you're talking about energy and leadership, of knowing where you need to kind of lean into, or knowing how to kind of help others find their energy, and even as it links to what Cecilia was talking about, the source of the energy, and getting our metaphors right. There's this wonderful book that I read, probably the best book of 2020 in my own world, was a book called Sand Talk by Tyson Yunkaporta, an Indigenous Australian author. Yep, a few people here have read it. Pat's got it right there, which is beautiful. And one of the chapters that Tyson talks about there is the importance of metaphors and getting metaphors right. Oh, there we go. I wish I had mine in reach. Sand Talk by Tyson Yunkaporta. So Tyson makes this, he shares this story of how he went to a school in the outback, and they had this mural of fishes in a river, and the fishes represented the students. But as part of the mural, there was a big fishing net. And the implied, like, it was a lovely piece of art, but when you stop to think about it, it was implied that the fish were going to be caught and harvested for industry, which is a metaphor for the schooling system in grooming, I guess, young people for industry. And it's just at this subtle, it's hard to even point to, like, but you know, if we get our metaphors wrong, they can start to play out, or wrong, that's a little bit too binary. If our metaphors are off kilter, they can start to kind of really warp the way that we relate to things. So back to you, Ian. In my own mind, I've got this sense of like some sort of psionic or sorcerer or something that's deeply attuned to energy in terms of how you show up, and also how you sense what kind of energy is required. So it's not simply the monodimensional of like the motivational speaker who's all in your face saying, "Oh, I'm energized," you know, who here is feeling excited? Are you excited? It's not that so much. I get much more of a, I don't know, there's that Yoda, like, you know, just so, you know, that showing up and applying things just so. I don't know. That's my sense anyway. We all form our own vibes.
I think one of the things about roles is that we're all, and one of the reasons I chose Yoda, apart from the archetypal, you know, influence that comes across, but you know, there is a life force within all of us, whatever we want to call it. And I think as leaders, we are called to energize the life force in folks. That's our role as leaders. We're here to see that person who's in front of us. Of course, you know, we're all one of a kinds. There are no duplicates. But it's really seeing that person. I was on a call earlier today where one of the women online was focusing on. She told a story about how she's moved to a location where people see her. She said, and I sense that there's a lot of people who they're not seen, or they don't feel like they're seen. And our role as leaders, correct me if I'm wrong, but our role as leaders is to see people and to appreciate them and to acknowledge them, but more to help them see themselves, that one of a kind human being, to help them see that and to bring that person to life. That's the role of leadership.
I love that. I love it. And I also, in amongst the spectrum of the rich, vibrant complexity of leadership, that's one vivid thing. And there's other elements in this kind of grand pantomime that we're all performing. And like for me at the moment, the more I sense into climate change, systemic inequality, the meaning crisis that we're facing, and all of the other rather existential threats, the more I become aware just how complicit I am in capitalism and the neoliberal mythology that is destroying our planet and many good things around us, the more I'm, you know, this question of roles, there's this thing of, it's complex, right? Because you have people and you want people to, when people feel seen, as you're saying, when people feel safe and noticed and acknowledged, when they feel that their work has meaning and that they matter and they contribute and they're part of a community, we tend to do better things. We tend to be less selfish. We tend to be more forward thinking. We tend to be more generous and abundant. So there's a role there. And then there's also this collective malaise where sometimes there are some paradigms that need to be completely inverted in some leadership spaces, and that requires more trickster energy of someone coming in and being the provocateur or being the jester, of telling truth to those in positions of power. And then sometimes it requires the weavers, the connectors, the harmonizers to kind of bring disparate threads together. And then others, it's the healers that need to come in. Others, it's the scouts and the pioneers. Like there's so many myriad potential roles that we can play in amongst leadership. But I'd say that, Ian, what you're saying there is one of those common threads amongst it, like how we show up. We want for a world where people feel safe and secure and seen and appreciated, and that we all have a chance to flourish.
Yeah, and I think it's also it's by being who we truly are, and by playing the roles that we're talking about, we will get into a place of making some of the systems that really don't work for most people. As I think Buckminster Fuller was one that said, it's not about a new system; it's about having a new system that means the old ones become obsolete. Here's a book I read over the break that I recommend, because this book pretty much tells you that the economic system of the Western world is a silly, stupid system, and that there's actually something better out there. So Stephanie Kelton, The Deficit Myth. And I see a lot of these kind of things. Another book on my list that I just finished is this one, Conscious Leadership. I sense there's a zeitgeist. There are a lot of fake fraud leaders out and about at the moment, and there's a zeitgeist that says, let's have, to use an Aussieism, let's have fair income leaders. Let's not have bullshit leaders. Let's have fair income leaders. And I think it starts with people like us, ordinary folk like us on the call. We've got to be fair income. And that's what I want to bring to all of my roles, whether that's, husband, father, friend, mentor, whatever it is. I want to be fair income in all of them.
And the trickster in me wants to be honest in my deceits as well. There's I think one of the things that stood out to me last year that I came across was the notion of solar punk, which is a political movement, philosophical disposition, and an aspirational aesthetic. Solar punk, the punk in it, and I feel uncomfortable with the word punk, but the punk is those of us that dare to actually believe that the future is not this dystopian cyberpunk wreck that we seem to be, all evidence seems to be suggesting that we're pointing ourselves into, mass extinctions and so on, the things that are very actually happening now. But possibly it is possible within us to move quietly and plant things. And that notion of moving quietly and planting things, I think just is, personally, I find it so enlivening. And for all of us here, like it means that we're in a world now where social media and the algorithms have kind of created this warped distortion, which Ian, I think points to some of the things that we might consider to be non-fair dinkum. Bullshit itself, we're flooded with bullshit nowadays. Bullshit is a kind of thing where it plays with our sense of salience. So we tend to think that certain things are relevant, even if part of us knows it's not so much so. A bullshit artist makes such a charismatic and compelling argument that we get swept up and caught up in the bullshit. And there's so much of that going around because social media algorithms love bullshit. They love anything that will fracture and polarize and divide us. And anything that triggers outrage and all those emotions, we'll get likes and we'll get followers. And so we end up with this like crazy internet of beefs where everyone's arguing and there's kind of all this cacophony and noise. And in amongst it, maybe we don't have to subscribe to that. Maybe there are those of us scattered around that can move quietly and plant things. And to me, I mean, that alternative path that kind of circumvents much of the myriad bullshits of where social media has gone to, that I find very, very appealing. curious if anyone wants to jump in on that.
It's the 1%. It's the 1% of us who choose to do things that aren't part of the gaggle, the noise, the cacophony. Just go ahead and do it. And some of it will take root and be really wonderful, and a lot of it won't. It'll die on the ground. But at least we have a go.
My sense is there's a lot of momentum around this. I mean, I began in the leadership development space over 30 years ago, and I was reflecting to someone the other day when I first began. There were no believers in those days. You know, I left the corporate world thinking it was going to be easy to be a business mentor, and I have to tell you it wasn't. And for the first couple of years, we thought it was a very bad idea because we weren't doing very well. But what I've seen over the journey, there's a lot more people open to what I call heart leadership than there's ever been. And I sense a groundswell. You know, we're fed up with the bullshit artists who lead us, and so there's a groundswell, and I think there'll be a peaceful transition to fair income leaders. There's a few of them around. Actually, I see, you know, in terms of politics, you know, Jacinda Ardern across the ditch, I think's a fair income leader. The Scottish Prime Minister, I think, is a fair income leader. The Iceland Prime Minister. Interestingly, folks, and particularly for the blokes in the room, these are all women. So us blokes have got to lift our game a bit, I think.
Yep. Look, it's so true. I mean, I spent all my time with senior leaders, and it's so joyful to walk amongst and work with female leaders who have that, who are not afraid to show care and to be vulnerable. And then you go and work with some of the old school guys, and they think they have to be command and control, and because that day is over. It's only useful in terms of an immediate emergency, clear and present danger. That's the only time.
Kim has this 5-year journal that she journals in every day. And this year we're in the year 2 of it. So she got to see what happened this time last year. And this time last year, I had a tarot reading, tarot cards. Now, I'm not one, even though I'm a wizard, I'm not inclined towards magical thinking unless it's amusing and it serves us. I consider tarot a kind of narrative therapy and a source of creative provocations. Nonetheless, the artist that we had do this, she's wonderful. She's a storyteller. She was shuffling cards, and one of my biggest angsts at that time, I was so down because of the bushfires that were happening in Australia. Like, I think that I was grieving and actually depressed, like crying and But I was also so conflicted about my role, because the last thing I felt at the time, the last thing the world needs is more white dude, leaders creating more noise in the space where because I really do, I agree with the sentiments here. We need more female leaders. We also need to listen more to Indigenous folks, and we could learn a lot more from folks from other countries. And one of the things that she said is that, the thing that many men forget is that the king kneels to the queen. And there's this notion that, you have, and by the way, I'm not one to gender things like this. I'm all for fluidity. This is just an amusing narrative archetypes that we can play with. How it manifests is something that I think is open to all. But this notion that you have these kind of men foolishly going about doing their things, but ultimately they kneel to the queen. I like that energy. I like that kind of thing of like, yeah, show up, do your thing, be vibrant and vivid, but also listen, like, listen to the women and listen to your elders. We had this horrible situation earlier in Melbourne where a set of sacred trees that were, or sacred sites sacred to Indigenous folks here were what, I won't go into the details of it, but essentially a highway was going right through it. But folks that wanted to volunteer and help out there, one of the things that the Indigenous folks ask is that, you know, if you're showing up, this is women's country here, listen to the women, listen to the elders. And I really like that. I really like that clarity, like that kind of tempering of the otherwise bombastic male energy that can get out of whack. And here I am, I'm sprouting all sorts of, I guess there's a hermetic principle here, you know, Hermes Trismegistus, fictitious wizard character, the synthesis of Hermes and Thoth. There's different principles, as above, so below, and so on. There is a principle that says all is gendered. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but sometimes it's useful when we're playing amongst the narratives to kind of think, oh yeah, I can see how there's a certain masculine energy to that role or feminine energy to that role. As with all things, the trouble is when we become too wedded and too attached to any particular notions. Ultimately, at any point, we need to be able to step back and think, at least this is what I do. I think, like, is this moving us closer to a world that's more curious and kind? And that beacon thing of curiosity and kindness, how can we co-create a world more curious and kind? It's probably one of the most eternal North Star compass settings that has served me through the years. Co-creating a world more curious and kind.
It's probably the perfect question when we talk about clarity of roles and what our roles might be. When you said that, Jason, I immediately thought, and I can't think of the originator, but it was the line is to be kind because everyone you meet is fighting a great battle.
Yeah.
And the sense of it is that, you know, we're all struggling to be who we are and to become everything that we're capable of. And so kindness is one of the things that gives us permission, if you will, to be curious enough to take the next step. So that the two together, I think, are a wonderful combination of words, and they're also, I think they're also pathways that we can, that, you know, they're kind of, if you're walking down a road, they're great companions to have on the journey, curiosity and kindness, aren't they? So,
yeah.
So I wonder, folks in the room, what have you heard yourself say to yourself during the conversation that you think might be important for you in role clarification?
I've thought about my choice of word for this year based on coming to this session, and I have chosen advocate. That is advocate.
Nice.
My primary role this year is to be an advocate for the people that I work with and serve.
What a lovely insight, David.
Yeah, I mean, to do that, it means that I have to see the best in them, because it's probably improper for me to advocate for someone who I believe won't serve others or won't help others, even if they don't help themselves. But yeah, so that's my choice.
So, Tim, are you staying with Zen Archer for another year as your role, or?
I am continuing on for at least January. I'm working through a couple of ideas at the moment, and looking at my principles and I guess my practices and rituals to see, okay, well, are there any things I want to change in that for the coming year? There's one that I'm going to do around field notes, so forcing myself to do a bit more journaling and reflection. I'm not an ethnographer, but something along that line in terms of why I would do field notes and do some observations and tracking some reflections on that. But that's sort of, I'm working through the course, the modules again online with Jason's program, just to be open to what falls in front of me as I go through the process. So I've got some ideas, but I'm not holding them too tightly.
That's lovely. I think that's the way to be. I might also suggest, oh, sorry, you go.
This isn't about roles and responsibilities, but I was thinking about words and how they hold meanings for us. And I was thinking about last year being in the Chinese zodiac, the year of the rat. And my son was born in Beijing and 12 years ago, so he is the rat. And then my stepson is 12 years previous, and he is also the year of the rat.
That's awesome.
And I was thinking about, I think it was in 2002 when SARS-1 emerged in Guangzhou, and I was there, and I just wanted to get the hell out of China as quickly as possible. But there was this sense that this global pandemic was about to take place, and in fact it was stopped and it didn't really happen. I mean, it was just kind of contained. But I was thinking on one level how lucky it is that it happened in an age where we're all connected digitally. That was one kind of negative thought that I had. But the other thought about, they say in the Chinese zodiac, when it's your year, it's your birth year, and you have to wear red underneath to protect you from this monster. And I was thinking about how it's meant to be either the best year in your life or the worst. And if bad things happen to you, they happen in a tremendous way. So I was just thinking about that, and I was thinking about the year of the rat and just the meanings behind that in the Chinese zodiac. That's all. But I certainly don't have a word. But I hope I can start doing your course and start the journey. Yeah.
And I think this is nothing. I mean, there's certainly there's a moment where we can anchor to, but it's not something that we need rush. Like I'd encourage everyone just to take the time, and when it kind of coalesces, you'll know it, you'll feel it. Like the words thing, I remember last year reading quite a few articles that were venerating the rat in terms of, like, my last name is Fox, so I have a soft spot for the cunning and conniving and clever and the ability to, punch above your weight and like all of that, that the rat does so well. I remember reading quite a few articles there, and there's inspiration that can be found from the noosphere. There's probably a point of clarification I just want to make regarding the word that we choose, which is like a chapter of our life. If we think of our life as an unfurling biography, year on year, of course it's not, it's a narrative fallacy, but it's useful for us to think like that. There's a particular flair there, but roles, even though like sometimes I like to step back and look at society and think at a high level, what role are we playing? There's also an acknowledgement that for all of us, our roles are situational. So we speak about roles here, but, as soon as, in Ian's context, as soon as his grandkids come, they're like, Ian's in the grandfather role, like potentially if that's the thing. Like when Tim arrives in front of the desk for PhD mode, like that's kind of the role that's there. And so just we've got to maintain a bit of fluidity, but noticing our own patterns and how we self-sabotage. Sometimes choosing a word to serve as a beacon can help to jilt us out of a kind of a loop of patterns of self-sabotage that might just bring us into new territories and domains. I'm curious to hear from some folks that maybe we haven't heard from yet. There's some really thoughtful folks here. And personally, what I'm excited about is any connections, any yes ands, any even disparate thoughts that you think, I'm not sure if this necessarily, I don't know how this connects yet, but it's made me think about this, because that'll be a gift for all of us to hear.
So I've got a few things to say, and these may not be quite connected yet. But when I think about, I guess, leveraging off some parts of the different conversations, but when I think about the year of the rat, in some ways, it's also about sort of like a rebirth. And, 2020 in ways is almost like a rebirth as well. But then when you sort of some of the I guess the open loops you've left as well is around moving quietly and planting things. And I guess one of my sayings has always been around planting seeds, and and they will germinate when the time is right as such. And through that, there's a particular energy with that. So when we go back to Tyson Yunkaporta's book Sand Talk, in a way that was a channel of one of the elders within the Aboriginal heritage, and he had no concept when he wrote it. Wasn't going to do any sort of advertising at all or anything like that. And it was almost, in a way, he was moving quietly and planting things as such as what you've just highlighted there.
Yeah.
And it was the environment was right pretty much for the world to pick it up as such, quite significantly white people as well to pick it up and really, create a movement as such from that perspective. So I look at, I'm just drawing all these threads together of what you've spoken about for the last hour to form a picture in my mind of what that all means and what that all looks like from my perspective.
Yeah, beautiful. It's
Just
such a...
Let's
go. Edward.
Just as Simone was talking in the conversation, I just keep thinking back to, the grim, and there's this meme that's going on in the States about this dumpster fire of 2020, which I think is really unpleasant and negative, because there's really such an opportunity. And I really feel this sense of urgency because things have been like thrown up in the air in the last year, which is the best time to make changes, to analyze what's happened and figure out, what should it look like. So many people say, I can't wait for it to get back to normal, and it drives me crazy because there was so many things wrong with the past normal. And doing this exercise, picking the word, picking what your role is going to be, can be transformative for you and those around you. You can say, okay, now where do we want these pieces to fall out? Because it wasn't perfect before, we can make it better. We can move it in a positive direction. And I think, as Simone was saying, that kind of triggered those thoughts in my head, is like, how do we seize on this? But I can't escape this nervousness that we're running out of time, because things are going to snap back, and then it's going to become normal, and then everybody's just going to fall right back in the ruts they were in, and there won't be significant positive change. And so it's an interesting anxiety, I guess.
One of the expressions there that might help Edward in that sense, in my heart leadership community, we talk about choosing now. Over normal.
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
Choosing now over normal. There is always urgency. That sort of concept might be useful.
That's great.
I also think that if we recognise that we've all got the 11th hour built into our DNA, we will adapt. That's one of our superpowers as humans, is adaptability. And we tend to forget that. We tend to forget that we're actually more adaptable than we recognise that we are. And if you have a look at your own life, if you look at your own body, I mean, you've got a new stomach lining every 24 hours. We change and we adapt all the time. And some of it's incremental, some of it's step.
It was one of Charles Darwin's insights, wasn't it? That's the misquoted one, but it was one of his great insights about our superpower of adaptability.
I would suggest that that superpower has gotten a bit out of control, though, with exponential technological change. And that's kind of the threat. Yeah, we'll adapt, but the prognosis is looking pretty grim at the moment in terms of where we're collectively heading. And we're also, we're all a pretty privileged bunch here, so we'll probably be mostly fine. But many in the world won't be. But again, in amongst all the dire outlook, we have the opportunity to move quietly and plant things. And just echoing Edward here, this is a moment. It's almost like our little apocalypse appetizer here. There's a moment where the narrative is disrupted, and before things settle back in again, and before things return back to normal, and we just carry on and distract ourselves as we all hurtle towards extinction, we have a moment to possibly jilt a few things, to create enough tilt to shift things enough that we might be able to avert some of the more dire aspects of the futures that we tend to be living into.
I understand that Mother Nature is already helping us because the Earth's axis has already tilted in the last few months quite significantly, as I understand it.
Really?
And maybe that is a reminder, just another. I think everywhere you look is a reminder of the urgency of the moment. But my sense, I'm optimistic about it because more people are seizing it than I've seen in my lifetime.
Perhaps if it tilts a little bit more, we'll have a reversal of the poles, and then the technological boom adaptability thing will be thrown out of kilter, and we'll have to start again at a technical level.
I'm not the guru on how the Earth.
But actually, on that notion of starting again, there are complexity scientists right now working on this notion. I mean, many folks are, and it comes in various forms. But some of you might be familiar with the notion of Game B. Tyson Yunkaporta is in amongst it. Game B is essentially not Game A. And Game A is full of the neoliberal, capitalist, competitive, win-at-all-costs mentality that's causing most of the devastation. But there are pockets of folks that are exploring, are there ways that we can have non-rivalrous omni-win situations? And one of the things that most of the Game B folks are finding is that we need to draw inspiration from some of the oldest living cultures on the planet, which then refers back to the indigenous knowledges and wisdoms that Western culture has long been disregarding. So we're in a situation where there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen, and a lot of opening ourselves, being quite vulnerable and humble with curiosity and kindness to other ways of being, and to just how we relate, how we show up in the world. I don't know, this is all very alive for me at the moment. I had a year where 60% of the time, about 50% of the time, I was away from home because of flying. And I know that many of us here do a lot, previously have done a lot of flying. I don't think that world is necessarily coming back, or if it is, I don't know if it's what I want. But I'm in a situation where personally, I'm just trying to figure, how does this look? How do I show up? How can we? I don't know. I'm still figuring it out.
I like this idea of game B. Interestingly, that in the world, the B Corps, which are these organisations that are much more approaching things not from a profit point of view, but rather the planet, people on the planet are first. So there's more and more B Corps happening in the world, and so I sense a shift even in some of the corporations. I mean, one of the reasons I read this book is I'm a fan of one of the authors, John Mackey, but I was interested to his take on being taken over by Amazon. What would that mean for the future? Because I was a bit skeptical about Bezos, but I came away with a different view from reading this. I think that's part of our way forward as leaders is to be open to be having our old ways challenged. That's not something that too many neoliberals, they don't want to have their way challenged. But I think that fair income leadership is about being prepared to have your way challenged.
I would say it's probably one of the biggest challenges is that many of those that are entrenched within large organizations are realizing that in order to move closer to future relevance, they have to actively dismantle some of the very structures that enabled them to get into positions of power and influence in the first place. And that takes a certain level of maturity, developmental maturity, to be able to do that. It takes a certain not egoless quality, but like a certain, there's a selflessness to that. And otherwise it's pretty hard for most folks to do that. But, we are seeing some of the effects where we are starting to see more women in leadership, more diversity in leadership. I still think that the underlying structure, the operating system that we have on this planet is due for a bit of an overhaul. And this is where, you've got Game B, you've got metamodernism, you've got other things that people are thinking, liquid democracy and other things like that. People are thinking through this. It's just, I guess it takes catalyzing events like a global pandemic, like the, who knows? Anyway, it's going to be interesting times. I've got to keep my pessimism in check and adopt my optimistic aesthetic, lest I bring everything down. It's too early for whiskey.
Well, I'm just going to give folks a sort of a little moment. We're just coming towards the top of our time together, and I just wanted to talk a little bit because I always give the guest the last word. So Jason will have the last word in due course, but I wanted to give other folks opportunity. But I also wanted just to let you know about next time, because we have these conversations every first Wednesday. It's usually at the 3:30 Australian Daylight Savings Time, but sometimes when we have international people, we do a different time. But next month, we will be at the same time, and our guest is David Deanspear, who you've seen and heard on the call today. And our subject is the consistent truth about leadership. And so that it will be really continuing on, won't it, David? So much from our conversation today. But I encourage you, when you register for these things, you automatically go on the invitation list, and you can then unsubscribe if you don't want to be involved. But you will all get an invitation to David's session. And also coming up next month, my new book, Heart Leadership, is just out and about, and I'm doing it.
There we go.
There you go.
Where can we get a copy?
Well, I was just about to tell you.
Okay.
You can, because I'm doing a couple of things. You can buy the book on Amazon or whatever, but if you wanted a signed copy, and you wanted to have a conversation around it, then that's coming up on the 24th of February. So I'll send a link later on. There's a fee, a small fee involved. It's $55. You pay the $55 and you join me and other people who are reading the book in a conversation. And there's 3 different times. And that means that you get a numbered signed copy. I think Jamie was fortunate enough to get number 5. I think Jamie, and Simone, I think, was even, I'm not too sure what number Simone had, but and Craig, I think, was number 44. So I'm only signing 100 of these, so I'll put a note to you in an email later on about that. There you go. So that's the advertising there. So while I was doing that, I just wondered, as we're coming close to our time, are there any other thoughts? There might have been an aha moment you haven't had a chance to share yet. Now's your opportunity.
I did notice Natalie unmute a few times. I'd love to hear what she had to say.
Oh, great. Good observation.
Thanks, Jamie, and thank you. It's been a fantastic session, very thought-provoking for this early in the year, and some terrific new words to go away with. To provide some context, I work in healthcare, so a very clinical environment, and we're often not great at innovating, and our staff work in very, confined and defined roles. But it's given me a lot of food for thought, and certainly 2020 was a big upheaval for healthcare as an industry as well. So I think my word, given all of our sort of rhythms and practices have been sort of very much changed, is going to be momentum. And I think sort of just leveraging off a few of the comments around energy, around having control, about self-reflection. I think that's a word that sort of resonates with me. I'm just wondering whether I need a second word to go along with that or not, but momentum is a word that, yeah.
Maybe the shadowy side of that's worth reflection, but I think it's good we take a moment to pay honour to the healthcare workers.
I love that, and I just with most of these things, I would just be mindful that of premature convergence, where we kind of have something and we kind of go for that. Sometimes it might be, we spend a little bit more time and maybe we circle back, and that's the thing. But it's exciting to notice it, and it's also exciting to hold that tension before kind of thinking this is the one, and just explore what emerges from within that. And I say this is like, I should have had my word by now. Should have. It was my birthday last month, solstice, New Year, but it hasn't emerged for me just yet. As in it, just yeah. So I would encourage us to, take our time.
Interesting connotation to give the last word to someone who hasn't found their word yet.
It's yeah. I mean, I think also I kind of. There's this thing, I put together a program like this. I worry about this guru culture that we seem to have. There's, this cult of excellence, these experts with the answers. And more and more, I'm realizing that the more that we relate to life as a complex, dynamical unfurling, of which we are species of experience, we get to witness our own unfurling and co-create this future that we're living into. The more that we see it as complex, as distinct from complicated, the better we're going to be. Now, a complicated view of life is to look at it as an architect might, as a kind of a planner might, or as to look at life as though it were a machine, to kind of work out, okay, what are the bits that I need to have control over? What's the things, and what are the problems? How do I fix those things? And what's my plan? And we build these linear plans. We get the calculator out, and it's this, we delude ourselves or comfort ourselves with this kind of pseudo certainty. But as Tyson Yunkaporta writes at the start of his book, there's a war of like this the artificial simplicity that comes from a complicated view of life with these experts with all the answers, versus the rich complexity, which includes a whole heap of unknowingness, ambiguity, volatility, paradox, nebulosity, and doubt. And living in that world where we show up a little bit more surrendered, but also a little bit more open, where we're mindful of the consequences, intended or not, of the actions that we take, and where we move quietly and plant things and attend to the kind of future that we want to see for ourselves in the world. I mean, I find that so much more enlivening. And so I would just encourage all of us to be conscious of how we relate to the complexities of life, to be mindful of whether we're taking the view of an expert or the view of an explorer, whether we're trying to look to fix problems or whether we're trying to imagine and create new worlds. And the more we can do the latter, the kind of, I think the richer life is going to be for us. So hopefully that's some nugget of inspiration in amongst what's been a wonderful, wonderful meandering conversation, including a little bit of time in the depths of the abyss. And I wish all of us well in our own complex and flowing stories.
Thank you all. This has been another Sparkenation Conversation. Our special guest has been Jason Fox. Thank you again, Jason. I wish you all well.
Thank you. That's really nice. Thanks.
I wish you all well as you discover your words and your roles. And we have a habit of ending with Shakespeare, so we will today. This above all, to thine own self be true.